very seldom that we have a guest on our program when we only have an hour. It's very difficult to get into that guest to find out something about that person. So we generally don't do it. But Saturday, I happened to stumble across a gentleman standing in Pete Rose's office that I certainly recognized the name. And I realized that Roger Kahn is not going to be here forever. So if you don't mind, we're going to take this hour just to shoot the breeze here about a book he wrote and an upcoming book that's going to be on Pete Rose. Roger Kahn, of course, is the father let's not say the father, let's say the author of The Boys of Summer, written in 1972 about the Brooklyn Dodgers back when they beat everybody but the New York Yankees. Year in and year out, they beat everybody but the New York Yankees. But I can't think of a baseball book that's probably gotten more attention and been more read than The Boys of Summer. So we're going to shoot the breeze here with Roger Kahn for a while. How are you, sir?
Oh, well, I'm delighted to be here. Sort of excited that I saw a 45-year-old man go 5 for 5. 5 for 5 at 45.
Yeah. Not very often you see a team lose 13-4 either, even with a 5 for 5 from the player manager.
Indeed. He said he could have gone 10 for 10 and they wouldn't have won.
Yeah, true. Roger, you wrote The Boys of Summer in 72, looking back at the 57 Brooklyn Dodgers.
52, 3, because they moved to L.A.
Okay, yeah. Why suddenly Pete Rose? I don't know if there's anybody that's been written about more in baseball than Pete Rose. Why Pete Rose?
Well, of course, I've watched him for years. I've watched him since the days when my beard was black. As a child, I had a baseball-playing dad, and I was told to play about the way Pete does, and slight difference in level of execution. I've admired him as a performer. I suppose some would now say as an entertainer. I not only admired the 5 for 5, I admired the play he made on a foul ball near the dugout.
The attempt, yeah.
Didn't
catch it, yeah.
I think he symbolizes, I'm not sure what yet, but something of the American work ethic. So I don't feel I'm writing a book about Pete Rose, baseball person, any more than Iacocca was about a car salesman or Yeager was about a pilot. And I think there are people who look upon Pete as a work ethic, blue-collar hero, and it's a considerable challenge to try to capture that in 400 pages.
The only problem, though, is, Roger, is that there have been several people that count down to Cobb, and there have been other books that have been written about Pete Rose that pretty much state the work ethic, and they had first slides in Charlie Hustle. I would think in 1986, writing about someone who'd played 22, 23 years of professional baseball, certainly got his fair share of compliments and records, and I think his performance is, to your disadvantage, his career has mostly been in front of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people because of television. I mean, we're talking about a very well-known product that you have to find a different angle to talk about.
Right, and what is new, and of course that's
what is new. That's
what the publishers are paying me to find out.
Yeah.
But with The Boys of Summer, a centerpiece to that book was Jackie Robinson. Robinson didn't exactly play in obscurity.
He played with a similar abandon to Pete Rose too.
Very, very similar kinds of ball players. But Jack was covered by newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and just millions of words were written about Jack. Well, when we got
for all the wrong reason, I might add.
It's right. But when we got a rapport going sometime afterwards, there was an awful lot new. I mean, Jack had some time to think. We talked, and it took a long time. It wasn't one of these things where you can go up to Jack with a tape recorder and say, tell me about how it was then and how it is now. It took many, many meetings and dinners and lunches, and then there was new stuff. It's a question of patience, and I say to myself now, I'm not on a newspaper. There's no deadline tomorrow. Stay with Pete, and what I would like to do in one phrase is try to capture the bar of music that is the man.
Sounds like an easy assignment. Roger Kahn is our guest. The author of many books. I suppose the best known was I'm sure the best known was The Boys of Summer. He was also an owner of a baseball franchise, the Utica Blue Sox, AA franchise up there in the hills somewhere in New York. And we'll find out who Roger Kahn is and just how you go about this task of writing a book on Sports Talk this evening. Roger Kahn, our guest, and he has the enviable yet unenviable task of writing a book on Pete Rose. This is a subject that has been much talked about, much written about. How do you go about writing a book? I mean, it doesn't start once upon a time, does it?
And it really doesn't. At this point, the research is essentially like a vacuum cleaner. Get as much, as many perceptions from as many people as you can. Listen to Pete as much as you can. And you really don't begin once upon a time a baby was born. First, you want to get the reader's interest. Then you can maybe go into it. But first, the reader has to care about the person being born.
Mm-hmm.
So
But don't you have that built in? I mean, I wouldn't think someone would just pick up a book on Pete Rose unless there was interest in Pete Rose. I don't think that's a subject that someone running through an airport would just pick up the book and read on the airplane. Coca, you might. The Pete Rose story, whatever it is, I wouldn't think you would. Am I wrong?
Lord knows. The sales process, of course, includes reviewers. If you get reviews that say there's nothing new here, that's going to hurt. What I'm working toward now is the tremendous sea changes that have gone on in the 24 years of Pete's major league career. These are changes in the game: money, media, if I dare say it, cocaine. There was plenty of booze when I covered
suppose
baseball.
you should say it. You should say it loudly.
Indeed. There was booze, but I really was not aware of any drug life in baseball.
If you include alcohol, though, there was as much drug abuse then as there is now.
But alcohol was legal.
Still is.
Yes.
You're right. But
I think a different thing. Than
people, of course, who suffer from that disease say that alcohol is no different than any other drug you want to talk about. It's just that it happens to be legal, but there are more people hooked on it than anything in the world. So that's another book.
Right. So if you buy a drink, you may get hooked on booze, but the fellow who sells you the drink can't blackmail you.
That is correct. That's an excellent point to make. The changes in the 24 years.
How does Pete perceive them? Obviously, you don't manage today the way you managed 24 years ago. Grievances exist. You can't find players. I just picked up. You have to be more supportive with today's players.
Babysit with them.
Yeah.
Pat them on the back.
Strong union.
Strong union.
Overpowering union.
Overpowering union.
So, what can we see about these changes, and what do these changes tell us not only about the nature of baseball and Pete Rose, but the nature of America?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that sounds pretentious,
Mm-hmm.
but if you write about a small aspect of the country, I think you'll learn about the whole country.
Yeah. Studs Terkel type of, let's find out what the country's like by talking to the people who live in the country.
Right, indeed, yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, I've never brought up the subject with Pete Rose, but I'm wondering if, we've talked many times in doing Head First about the difference in the athlete today as opposed to when he started. And it's hard to put into words the difference. The 24 years kind of pass, and this guy comes into your life and goes out of your life, and this season comes into your life and goes out of your life, and that batting championship and so on and so forth. But I would think with the when he started, management was the iron fist. I mean, you went to minor league baseball and you played there for 10 years if they didn't think you could play anyplace else. Now, you have guys coming out of college who resist going to the minor leagues and go straight to the major leagues and play. Dave Winfield, Bob Horner refused to go to the minor leagues, don't have to. I'm wondering if that breeds an entirely different culture of athlete. Obviously it should. And if we're seeing the last of a guy like Pete Rose, that there's no reason to think that in the next 10 years there'll be somebody else who has always played the game the way he appears to always play the game.
Curiously, Pete started in the New York Penn League, which is where I own the club, so we know some of the same terrain, and we both know what it's like to ride a school bus in upper New York State for 3 hours to a game and 3 hours back, no reclining seats. It's a long evening.
Yeah, no headset radios either.
No headset radios, and there are no days off in the league. You know why there are no days off in the league? No game, no receipts.
Ah, true.
Down in Utica, the kids played 76, it was scheduled 76 games in 76 days. Pete's had that life, and of course I think it breeds some of the competitive fire that we see in Pete. You don't want to go back to the bushes. It's very different culture in baseball now than there was, and I want to catch that.
Mm-hmm.
But Pete's been managing relatively briefly.
Mm-hmm. There's another aspect too, Roger, that I don't think a lot of people address, but is until now, I'd say in the last 5, 6, maybe 10 years of professional baseball, has been kind of left undisturbed, and that is I don't consider myself a genius, and I don't consider myself overly educated. But I can, if you give me a group of 300 people, and half of them are football players and half of them are baseball players, I can generally pick out the baseball players because they are uneducated. Generally speaking, they are uneducated people. If they leave baseball after 10 years, whatever education they've gotten in playing baseball. They leave these small towns. They used to leave these small towns, like Willie McCovey. High school graduate, and that's it. That's all the education he ever had. Now you find a lot more athletes who are educated. Pete is of the uneducated group. I mean, he has learned and become worldly from baseball. But I imagine when he started, he was no fun to talk with. All athletes now say, I don't know what they said back then, but I bet he said it a lot.
He's no fun to talk with, but he plays the press like...
no, he is now. He wasn't then, I'm sure.
I mean, play the press like Sinatra playing a Las Vegas audience.
Yeah, true, true.
Pete says common sense, common sense, common sense. If it were that easy, there'd be more Pete Roses.
Yeah.
There's obviously much more to it than that. Pete, as a young player, was, in my memory, sort of another Johnny Temple, another Eddie Stanky. But he was always available. In those days, there were no interview rooms. The locker rooms tended to be open right after a game. And in fact, when I covered the Dodgers, you go down during a game. Carl Ferrella was hit in the head by a pitch, and I wondered how he was. And I walked into the trainer's room, and Carl put out a hand and said, am I going to be blind? Because he'd been hit near the eye. There was much easier access. And, Pete was very accessible. Pete was never reticent. There were, of course, tough interviews. Classically, somebody like Carl Hubble didn't say a great deal. Pete always had something to say. And you're right, he's not educated in 4 years of romance novels from France. He's not a literary character who was at college.
Mm-hmm.
And Pete says, I must have gotten a lot out of high school because it took me 5 years to get through.
Sparky Anderson's a perfect example. This guy works on national television, national radio, and uses double negatives like it was the first lesson in English he ever learned. And it's incredible that he gets away with it, but there is a certain vocabulary, a certain conversation that's allowed a baseball player.
Right.
That's not allowed anybody else.
Charlie Dressen managed here and managed the Dodgers. Charlie would say, Pee Wee Reese, Pee Wee, he'd trun the ball over the first pretty good. Trun, the past tense of what?
Trone? Whatever. The other aspect is, Roger, is that when you were covering the Dodgers back in the 50s, you guys were basically sequestered for 7 months together, all across the Midwest, but you were together.
Yes, we were.
There was that unwritten rule that what you saw on the train, you basically kept on the train.
Absolutely.
You were telling me before we went on the air, you thought you had the moment of conception of everybody's fair game. Right. Would you mind repeating that story?
No, not at all. When you were on the train, when you were on the bus, there was a sense that you were with the team.
Part of the team.
Part of the team. In fact, the teams in those days picked up the expenses of many of the traveling writers, so the writers were, as Leo DeRocha would remind them, guests of the ball club.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want you to write. That
mm-hmm.
wasn't too great.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no writing of hijinks on trains, buses, or even in saloons. Of course, the writers were hijinksing as best they could on their salaries. Well, 1 year, I don't remember the specific year, but 1 year the Yankees won the pennant under Ralph Houck. And Ryan Duran, who's now working in an anti-alcohol program, was then on the other side of that issue and had a few. And he decided to make Ralph Houck eat his cigar. Ralph Houck is a very tough man and the wrong guy to do it. He turned, he had a World Series ring. He reached out, slashed Duran across the face with a diamond on the ring, and there was a great deal of blood and a lot of yelps. A late writer named Leonard Schechter wrote that story from a Yankee victory celebration on a train in the New York Post. And that was when the confidentiality of trains and buses began to vanish.
Editors then told their writers, that's what I want in my paper.
The Post is going to sell more papers than we are here at the Journal American or the Daily News. Go cover that.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel comfortable doing that? I mean, after being on the other side and keeping the family secrets, not airing the dirty linen in public, Did you feel comfortable doing that?
Not terribly, and my own standard is, how would I like this written about me? Not every night I've had on the earth has been a night of pure glory. It's funny, I had the Utica franchise, and USA Today sent a reporter, People magazine sent a reporter, and he was going to follow me around for 3 days. I had never had the experience of being followed around for 3 days. And I was going through a personal thing that I'm not embarrassed to speak about. I was going through a separation, and third day he thinks he has me, and it's the 5th inning of a game in a rainy night in Elmira, and he said, you find being separated lonely? I didn't say anything. He said, well, I was separated, and it was lonely. And I said, well, I guess it's a little lonely. Does owning a team help? Now I slip. I said, well, if you were worrying about the egos of 25 young ball players, you tend to worry less about the ego of a pretty blonde. He said, great, thanks. I said, off record. He said, you said it. I said, if you use this, I'm going to tell people that I didn't say it. He said, then give me another quote. And I thought and came up with a bland quote, and he agreed to use it. But no, I've been on the other side.
Yeah. Roger Kahn is our guest, author of The Boys of Summer. He is just beginning research on a book on Pete Rose, former owner of the Utica Blue Hose. I mean, this guy has got a resume that would just knock your socks off, and we'll continue our conversation after this. Tuesday night here on Sports Talk, Reds and Giants, Game 2 of the series. After that 13-4 drubbing last night, it's Bill Gullickson for the Reds and Vida Blue for the San Francisco Giants. Following the game, extra innings with Andy McWilliams. As always, Roger Kahn is our guest. When did you come into Cincinnati, Roger? When did you start looking closely at Pete Rose?
I went down to spring training, and I worked out a scenario which will tell all your listeners how much baseball I know. I said, I've got some other work to finish. August 7th looks good. By then, the Dodgers and the Reds will be locked in a bitter pennant race, and I'll pick up that Dodgers series.
We all thought that, Roger. We all thought that.
Oh, man.
So you're not so dumb. But you went to spring training to...
I went to get a feel for how Pete runs a spring training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Every manager does it a little differently, and Pete, for example, no inter-squad games. But you need to see, not just ask a man how he works. You have to observe him at work, observe the rapport with Pete and his players. And right in spring training, one reason to be a writer is you can sleep late. In spring training, Pete said, why don't we meet every day for breakfast at 7:45? I thought, oh, my God, what have I done? And we did.
I can tell you where, too, at the Village Inn in Tampa, right?
Indeed we did.
The Pancake House.
That's where we were.
The guy's a real creature of habit. But speaking of spring training, I'm wondering about the initial meeting between you and Pete Rose. I would think for a writer, more so than anybody else in the world, if you're going to write a book on a subject, your first impression is the one that's going to stay with you forever. Am I correct, or do you fight that first impression?
No,
you go with it?
The first, yes. Before you decide to go and give a year or two of your life to a book,
yes,
you better believe that you're doing something you want to do. We met far from a field at Peacock Alley in the Waldorf Astoria in New York to talk back and forth.
Nice place to meet.
It was.
Sure.
Pete had an open collar shirt, and he mentioned going to Geneva. And he gave me the name of his roommates, and he mentioned his emotions on his first flight as a young man who had never before flown.
This is all in the first meeting in the Waldorf Astoria.
Meeting. Getting the roommates' names right. I said, that's terrific, because the book builds on specific detail.
Mm-hmm.
Pete laughed a little. He said, I thought you'd like that.
Did he tell you also the first time he got room service?
I never heard that.
Have him tell you that story. Veda Pinson, I think, was his roommate. He has told us that story before. And Pete wasn't aware that you could get food delivered to your room. And Pinson said, sit down, kid, I'll show you. And he thought it was, he was like the Queen of England, the King of England. For room service, I bring cheeseburgers to my room.
There's another little background story that I kind of amused by. There was a press conference to announce the book. And I don't particularly like to talk about financial affairs with the world at large. So I raised the question with Pete and Reuben Katz, Pete's attorney. One of the reporters is going to say, hey, how are you fellows splitting the money?
Mm-hmm.
And let's not say. Privately, fine, but let's not say. Reuben said, you are splitting the money fairly. First question from the New York Times. Pete said some nice things about me. I said some nice things about him. Open. How are you fellows splitting the money? Pete leaned forward and said with great confidence, fairly.
It's one of the few times he'll follow the advice of his lawyer. He normally does what he wants. When you wrote The Boys of Summer, you talked to all of the constituents, all of the parties involved, Erskine, Campanella, Jackie Robinson, Joe Black, Don Newcomb, as many people as you possibly could. What's the approach with Pete Rose? Do you go to other people to get an impression of Pete Rose?
Yes, sure. Oh, very much. I'm going to be seeing Al Rosen for brunch. And Al is a fellow I go back. So he was playing for Cleveland in '54 when I met him. Al's a very, very sound observer, baseball man, somebody I respect. I know somebody Pete respects. Here's Roger Craig in town. I asked Roger Craig to compare Pete and Jackie Robinson. You go and do this, and you do this scores and scores of times. And as you do it, it's a very imprecise science.
Well, let me ask you a question about asking Roger Craig that question. I would think that would be difficult. Would you tell him in advance that you want to talk to him about comparing Pete Rose to Jackie Robinson, or do you want his first impressions?
I said, can we compare Pete Rose and Jackie Robinson? He said, let me think. And he took a few moments. And then he told a lovely Robinson story. He said, I came up and I won my first game 3-0 for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And Walter Alston said, the late Walter Alston said, well, you're off for 5 days. Why don't you go get your wife and kid from Montreal, then a Dodger farm? And he said, Robinson went over. He said, nice game, kid. But, it's going to be a little tougher after the first one. Where are you going? He said, I have to go to the airport. And I said, Jackie lived in Connecticut. He said, well, that's not that far out of my way. Why don't I drop you?
Really?
Yes.
Now, see, the impression that the legacy of Jackie Robinson is that this was a guy who was mad at everybody because of what he had to fight, the color barrier to get in. And then, as a superstar in professional baseball, still suffered a great deal of prejudice, still suffered.
Oh.
And I was of the impression that he held a great deal of white people responsible for the few white people or the number of white people that felt he was a second-class citizen. That would be a story that I'd have a hard time believing.
Well, I was his pale ghost for $75 a month. I did a column with Jack for a magazine that we managed to kill in 4 months. No, there was no.
He was not like that.
No, in late life he began to kid a little bit, and I was at his house in Connecticut, which is truly palatial, and had a lawn sweeping down to a lake. And Rachel Robinson, Mrs. Jackie Robinson, said, people sometimes ask, was he different at home after a tough game when they had shouted a lot of things at him? And she, he really never was. He never seemed to take it out on me or the children. Except if he'd had pressure, I could tell, because he put a whole lot of golf balls on the lawn, and he'd hit the golf balls into the lake. And Jack looked at me and said, the golf balls were white.
That's one way to take out your anger. Was Jackie Robinson the one person in talking with him for this Boys of Summer that was, I think you could probably do the book without Erskine, without Campanella, without Newcomb. Each one of them, you'd need the other ones. I would think that book would not work without Jackie Robinson.
I'd agree with you, Bob. I think that this was the first integrated team. This team had come together before schools were integrated. Curiously, I saw Earl Warren, the late Chief Justice, at a Dodger game, sitting with Walter O'Malley in the box at Ebbets Field. And it was a great night for Jackie Robinson. That was before the Supreme Court decreed that schools should be integrated. I'd like to think that what he saw in Brooklyn affected Justice Warren's thinking.
Except wasn't Justice Warren sitting in Brooklyn amongst 50,000 white people watching one black guy play baseball?
35. Well, I was all they could get in Ebbets Field, but crowd was not heavily black. No, but Robinson's extraordinary play and his interplay with Pee Wee Reese sort of leaped out on the field. Justice Warren is dead, and I can say that he didn't see too much after the fifth inning. Walter O'Malley served drinks.
Oh, wined and dined it, did he? You mean the Chief Justice can imbibe?
He was not then Chief Justice, but Mr. Warren imbibed lustily.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you still have a lot of people, Roger, that contact you, young kids, the next generation, that read that book that you get response from?
Schools, I do, Bob. I read this book for the course, could you tell me something about it? And what they really want you to do is do the book report for them. I try to answer those. Yeah, it continues.
That's a good idea. I never thought about writing the author and have him do it for me.
Yeah, there's going to be a new paperback edition. in a while, and here.
How many books have sold of The Boys of Summer?
Well, it was a Book of the Month Club main selection, so that's 150,000 hardcover books right there. Almost that much in hardcovers in bookstores, and then the paperback is about 1.5 million over the years.
So we're talking close to 2 million
Close
books.
to 2 million.
Has there ever been a sports book, to your knowledge, that has sold that many books?
Not as far as I know.
Has there ever been one that came close?
Maybe Instant Replay. I think that did pretty well. But I remember so vividly when I went to see Pee Wee Reese in Louisville, and after the book was #1 on the bestseller list, he said, "Do you remember what I told you?" And I didn't. And he said, "I'll help you in every way I can, Roger, but nobody cares about us. This book is never going to sell."
Harold is like that. I don't think he's ever going to change like that.
No.
The Boys of Summer was obviously a retrospective. Will that be the case with Pete Rose, or have you decided yet?
Part will be. Part will be a look back. I want, as far as I can, to go to the very fields in which he played. There's some chemistry there. Again, to go back to the Boys of Summer, I went to a place where Preacher Rowe had played as a boy, and the field was overgrown. And this is in Arkansas. Preacher Rowe, for you young folks, was a great spitball pitcher who confessed for money to Sports Illustrated that he threw the wet one. And we went to this field, and it's country Arkansas. It's Viola, Arkansas. And there's high grass and sage. I said, "Where are the kids playing ball?" I said, "Oh, since they got the interstates, you can get over to Memphis pretty quick and hear the rock music. Never be another game played on this field again." Whether or not that was true, I got some sense of life in northern Arkansas from that. So I got to do a lot of that here.
You don't have to go far, though, to see where Pete Rose played. It got his name on the ball field down there in Anderson Ferry.
Right. Well, that's a help. Maybe go to Geneva and see if the ballpark's the same.
Yeah.
It's a question of just picking up a sense of how the world looked then. Look at a picture of. I've been in Cincinnati many times, but the Cincinnati I first knew with the Dodgers here in '52. Hardly the Cincinnati of today. They've changed the whole downtown.
Gibson Hotel is gone.
Is gone.
That's where you all hung out, right?
Oh, Netherland Plaza.
The Netherland Plaza, it's now called. It was the Omni Netherland. It used to be just the Netherland Hotel. I'm sure that was a grand hotel back then. Wasn't a few years ago. Is now again.
There was a place where we misbehaved called the Barn. I don't know if that's still here. I guess not.
Where was it? Down on the levee? Down on the river?
Oh, we go over the levee to Covington and Newport.
Newport. Oh my God. You were lucky to make it out of there, Mr. Kahn.
I never.
Very few people did.
Never won anything at the wheel, so I was the wrong guy to take down.
Roger Kahn is our guest. We're shooting the breeze here on Sports Talk, and we'll continue after this. 13 minutes before 7, baseball begins at 7:05. That's broadcast time. 7:35 first pitch, second game with the Giants. Roger Kahn is our guest, and let me make this announcement. You are aware that Pat McAnally just retired from the Cincinnati Bengals. Well, this season he's going to begin work here at 700 WLW. Along the lines of what Dave Lapham did last year for us, he will, along with Andy McWilliams, host Bengals Roundtable when I'm gone on Monday nights and some Thursday nights throughout the football season. So you will have the inside perspective of the Cincinnati Bengals season with Pat McAnally, formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals, and now apparently just signed a contract with the ESPN to do college football. So we welcome Pat McAnally to the station. That's nice. Roger Kahn, our guest, we're speaking about building a book, and I guess that's the best way to put it. You don't just sit down and write one. You got to first build it and then kind of go from there.
Well, before I do page 1, I like to have some idea of where I'm headed at page 400. A friend of mine did a novel without an outline, and he found out after about 300 pages in the middle that it was a tangent that he had to cut. It's so hard to write the 300 pages. Why set fire to them? Know where you're going. And then be willing to be surprised. Very, very key. But don't have a rigid outline. See what's going to happen. As we kicked around with this pennant race, we're surprised, a little unhappily. Write what you find. But before I really do page 1, I will have an objective far down the road. This is where I want to get it at page 400.
Have you found that objective yet in this case?
Not
How long did it take you to find the objective of the Boys of Summer? Or what was the stated objective by Roger Kahn for that book?
I didn't want to write a book about baseball. I wanted to write a book about the passage of time and what time does to people and how people bear up against time, which is in a sense our common enemy. I didn't know what I'd find.
So you personalized the group as to individuals, because in the 50s all they were was batting averages, positions, and
yeah.
numbers.
Well, Duke Snyder's ambition was to get off the road and raise avocados. He bought a lot of avocado acreage, went bust. Now he's broadcasting the Expo games. He's back on the road. When I went to visit Clem Labine, who was a fine Dodger relief pitcher and an extraordinary man, he told me about how his son had lost a leg in Vietnam, and he told me that he would give up every World Series headline because he felt the travel of baseball had cost him a good relationship with his son. They'd had an argument, and hot words, and the boy said, I'm going to join the Marines, and the father said, go join the Marines, and 3 months later lost a leg. And after Clem Labine told me that story, as he was telling me the story, he wept. I had seen Clem weep in a 53 World Series when Billy Martin beat him in the 6th game with a single in the 9th inning. There was a different quality to the tears about losing a game and his son's losing a leg.
And feeling ultimately responsible by sending him to the recruiting office because of an argument.
And what indeed is...
Does he remember what they argued about?
No, he gave me the dialogue, and we couldn't use it on the air.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a father-son fight. I've had him with my kids.
I suppose it makes him feel a little bit better that he does remember the argument. I mean, if he didn't remember the argument, that would make it even more tragic, right? A senseless argument that drove his son to Vietnam that cost him his leg.
Or a sense of the son. I think this happens with a lot of Major League ball players. A sense of the son that the father is preoccupied with his stats, his career, and doesn't care that much about the family. So I think that was the at least the symptom, if not the core of it. Happily, there's been a great rapprochement between father and son.
What does that mean?
Rapprochement, coming together.
Talk plain English to me, Kahn. I don't use those big writer words.
I have no degree. I dropped out. When Clem was on, we were doing a Dick Cavett show. This is in line with Be Ready to Be Surprised. There was an audience for the Dick Cavett show. It was like the Carson show, and it got canceled because they only had 4 million listeners. I don't understand that. But
PBS, yes.
Yeah. So Clem said that he had remembered visiting his son in a veterans hospital, and there were 36 amputees and 2 wheelchairs. And he said, the war is costing $1 billion a day, whatever it was costing. And he said, I think for that kind of money, this country should be able to afford 1 wheelchair for each amputee. Knocked the audience
Funny,
over.
but not funny.
Yeah, knocked the audience over.
Roger Kahn is our guest. We'll continue our conversation, but here's a news update with Brian Combs.
And coming up at the top of the hour, the Senate has given President Reagan a victory. They've pressed ahead in the effort to send $100 million to the Contras fighting in Nicaragua. Ice cream being recalled in parts of the tri-state, and Colerain Township talking about adding a police levy to the fall ballot. Details at 7 on 700 WRW.
Roger Kahn, our guest, the author of The Boys of Summer, and an upcoming book on Pete Rose. By the way, when will this book hit the shelves? When?
It'll be turned in next April. And it should be out next summer.
Next summer. I asked you before we went on the air. I would think that as a writer, when you've got the Boys of Summer sitting there as on your mantle, that's your masterpiece. That's I don't mean to single it out like that, but to us, that's a masterpiece. Any book after that you write, every time that you write, you got to think, does this measure up to the Boys of Summer? It's got to be a heck of a medallion to wear.
It bothered me for a little while, and I thought of Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, and then wrote, quote, serious novels. You got tired of Holmes and Watson. The public wouldn't let him stop. Then after a while, I got a little more mature about it, and I said, what is anybody saying? What do you wrote a hell of a book. Just be proud of that. Red Smith visited Ernest Hemingway once and found out that Hemingway wasn't as wealthy as Red thought he should be. And they talked for a minute, and Hemingway said to Smith, well, I gave the royalties from my first good book I gave to my mother, and the second good book in a divorce, third good book educated my children. Red, you've only got so many books like that in you.
Yeah. And you happened to work with Red Smith. You told me you started with Red Smith?
My first job on a newspaper was putting away mail addressed to Red Smith on the New York Herald Tribune. Red was a great and dear friend, and Oh, a kind of a nice Red story. Red gave a course called Sports in an Urban Society, whatever that may be, at a university in New York. Here's how Red gave a course. He did the first lecture. He invited 14 friends. The fee, dinner at 21.
Not bad. Sit there and talk with Red Smith. For a while.
Pleasure.
Will you continue to write sports books? Would you prefer writing about sports or other subject matter?
Bob, the older I get, the more comfortable I am with it. There's a line of for Blake, I think, to see the universe and to see the world in a grain of sand, the universe in a water drop. I think if you look at sports, you see America, and as I said, with the Boys of Summer, you see time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready to say what I will see with Pete yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. You were also telling me the manner in which you named your book, your most famous book, The Boys of Summer, from a Dylan Thomas poem.
I see the boys of summer in their ruin. He was talking about young Welsh poets who'd gone down to London to become William Shakespeare, failed, and then tried to drink London dry. That was their ruin. With the Dodgers, most had come from, by New York standards, small towns. I mean, Carl Erskine, Anderson, Preacher Row, Viola, Arkansas, Gil Hodges, Princeton, Indiana, and so forth. They came to the big city, and there is a certain element of emotional ruin when you can't play the game anymore, whatever anybody may say.
Sure, right.
So there was a measure of ruin.
Are you still looking for a quote to kind of help direct you in the Pete Rose story?
Yeah,
You rely on that a lot, do you?
You listen, and and then you react. With Jackie Robinson and the Boys of Summer, as soon as I hit a button on a tape machine, he would get stilted. Robinson had been interviewed 10,000 times. I never used a tape with Jack. I used an old-fashioned method called taking notes. With some, I would take no notes, and I'd go home and type what they said. I have a decent memory. And you just adjust and adapt and change. And I teach journalism or creative writing once in a while, and the kids all start out thinking there must be a formula. Formula, as I said, be willing to be surprised.
Always be acceptable to a surprise. As a matter of fact, it may make the whole book, right?
And try to learn. Last night I learned that a 45-year-old man could get 5 hits and 5 times at bat, and the ground ball could become a triple.
Yes, and lose 13-4 in the process.
Yes.
Well, I know you're going to stay around here for a while. It's a pleasure to have had you on the program, and we look forward to the book. I think you'll be decently entertained by Cincinnati. Enjoy yourself.
The pleasure is mine, really.
Good. And come down anytime if you've got a few minutes. We'll shoot the breeze here on Sports Talk.
Great, Bob. This is
Roger Kahn. Roger Kahn, the author of The Boys of Summer and an upcoming book on Pete Rose. Reds and Giants next. And then Andy McWilliams with extra innings after the ball game. See you tomorrow night on Sports Talk. This is the home of the Reds, 700 WLW in Cincinnati.